Okay, so my name's Patrice and today I'm talking about hearing protection and the dangers of noise exposure. So as Dr. Biggs went through, I thought I'd go through a little bit about the ears so that you can follow where noise can impact your hearing. So the outer ear is made up of your ear canal, which in this diagram is here. Your middle ear, which is your eardrum or tympanic membrane, and the ossicles, which are the bones in hearing bones, as Dr. Biggs called them, they are located here, or in this diagram they are here. And then there's the inner ear, which is the cochlea, which is our hearing organ, the semicircular canals, which are for balance, and the auditory nerve. So the cochlea is here, the semicircular canals are here, and the auditory nerve is here. So when we hear a sound, the signal comes through the ear canal, it vibrates the tympanic membrane or eardrum, which then vibrates the ossicles, the little bones in your ear, and the signal, that pushes the fluid in your cochlea, sending a signal up your auditory nerve. So that's important because with noise, the signal follows that same pathway. So here we have a video. There we go. So this is showing you the pathway sound follows. So you can see there the tympanic membrane is moving, and in this case it's going to show you how the basilar membrane, which is in the cochlea, hears. So when a low pitched tone comes through, it vibrates this membrane. So you can see there's the wave there. That's a mid-pitched tone, and there's a low-pitched tone, a high-pitched tone, sorry. So when you have a more complicated signal like music, the signal can look like this in terms of the vibrations. So with noise, noise is any loud sound. Oh, any sound, whatever, any sound can be a noise. The main sources we see now tend to be from occupational sources such as mining, or if you're in the building industry, or other work-related noise exposure, as well as recreational noise exposure, which is on the increase at the moment. There's a lot more recreational noise now than there used to be in the past, from things like personal stereos such as iPods, if you're power tools, so if you like to do a lot of DIY things, lawnmowers, motorsports, so if you like motorcycles or various other things like that, whether you're a spectator or using them. Going to nightclubs or very loud concerts. Not so much something like a symphony, more like if you're an AC/DC fan or something like that.
And leaf blowers.
Yes, they can be quite loud as well. Now, with noise, the risk of damage to your hearing is dependent on the level of the noise, so how loud it is, the time of exposure, so how long you're exposed to the noise, and how often. It's also dependent on the pitch or the frequency of the sound. So a higher pitched tone can be more damaging than a lower pitched tone. So you can see here, for example, a vacuum cleaner is around 65 to 85, depending on what vacuum cleaner and things like that. A library is at about 40, and if you're standing near an aeroplane as it's taking off, it's up at about 115 dB, so that's here. So sound at a distance. So every time you double your distance from a noise source, the sound level decreases by 6 dB, and every time you move closer and halve your distance from a noise source, the level increases by 6 dB. So what that means is the further you are from a noise source, the better for your hearing, okay? So the further the better.
That doesn't hold in a confined space though, because you get reverberation.
Because of reverberation, it's different. But in an open area or a relatively large space, this applies. There will be some variation dependent on the distance, but it still applies to a certain extent in an enclosed space.
And the level of noise.
The level of noise, no. The level of noise, this applies regardless of how loud the sound is. It will always, at every time, if you're in an open space and you move further away from the sound level will drop. Okay?
Can I just jump in? Are you able to print that slide out?
This slide?
Can you print it out?
I can arrange.
It's just that I have a bit of an interest in that particular wording.
Okay. I can arrange that for you, or we can we find a way to put it on the website as well. Maybe I'll talk to Vanessa.
Thank you.
So this is just another representation of the other scale I showed you before. So below 75 dB, the damage to your hearing the risk of damage to your hearing is negligible, which means day-to-day noises generally won't have any impact on your hearing. It's loud sounds that will have some impact on your hearing. So the World Health Organization's regulations for hearing loss, for noise exposure, are 8 hours for the duration of 8 hours at 85 dB. Now, every time the sound level increases by 3 dB, the noise exposure length halves. So when you get up to 100 dB, it's at 15 minutes. So, iPods. I get asked this question a lot, so I thought it might be quite interesting. So if you're looking at the output of, if you're looking at 85 dB, which is the World Health Organization limit for 8 hours, that volume level is about 70% of the volume control on an iPod or a personal stereo player. If you're looking, as long as you're below so 75, where the risk to hearing is negligible, is about 55%, between 50 and 60%. So if you're using your iPod or your grandchildren or your children are using their personal stereo at roughly 60% of the volume or below, the impact on their hearing will be very negligible. If they've got it up at 100%, that's at almost, this study showed that it was at about 100 dB. So that, if we look at the previous slide, on the previous slide, they were allowed you were allowed 15 minutes at 100 dB. So that means if you have your iPod on full, you only really should be listening to it for 15 minutes. Okay? This particular slide looked at different types of headsets, so the earbuds that sit specifically in your ear, as well as the ones that go over the top, and different types of earbuds that sat in your ear. Generally, as long as the volume was below 50%, you could listen to it for however long you like. There's no time limit. So basically, all of this means that as long as you have your volume level at 50% or below, it won't have any impact on your hearing. Okay? If you have it at a very high volume, you should limit your time, or generally, if in doubt, turn it down. So when sounds are too loud, they can cause damage to the hair cells in your cochlea. So this may mean that softer sounds are no longer transmitted. So in a healthy cochlea, you can see here the cells, these are the outer hair cells, and they're in a nice arrow shape, and the inner hair cells are up here. You can see when the cochlea has been damaged, the outer hair cells have either disappeared or it looks severely damaged and disordered, and the inner hair cells are no longer as orderly as they are up here. So this can result from noise exposure as well as other types of hearing loss. This is all in the inner ear, which is what Dr. Biggs was talking about, that has an impact that isn't treated surgically generally. It's managed with hearing aids.
How to find out the damage?
Sorry?
How do you determine that they are damaged?
Generally it will show on your audiogram if you have significant damage to your hair cells. So that's how you show a hearing loss on the audiogram, your hearing test.
How do you get that picture?
This picture? What do you mean?
How was it taken? CT or?
This one would have been an electron microscope, and I have a feeling it's a rat's cochlea. So they have a rat without noise exposure, and then they have another rat with noise exposure. They won't be human ones, because to get this view you need to dissect the cochlea. And it would have been an electron microscope to get this much detail.
It's probably from a rat.
Yes.
Dead rat.
So is there any questions? No, thank you. So when you listen to noise, when you have any noise exposure, it can result in a hearing loss, known as noise-induced hearing loss. When you initially listen to some loud noise, you can end up with a temporary hearing loss, which is where the hair cells tire out. So the first signs of this are if you get what we call tinnitus, so any ringing or buzzing in your ears. With repeated noise exposure, this can result in a permanent change in your hearing thresholds. So the hair cells can't repair themselves, and there's no cure for this hearing loss. That's what's managed by hearing aids. So when you have repeated noise exposure, this graph shows ranging from 1 year to 30 years or more of noise exposure and the impact it's had on their hearing. So they've changed, this is a graph of noise. Down the side here is the extent of their hearing loss in dB, and across the bottom is the pitch or the frequency. So top end is the higher pitch tones, and this lower end here is the low pitch tones. So you can see here, as the noise exposure length of time of noise exposure increases, the hearing loss is more significant as it increases here, and it's in the higher pitch tones. So for speech, in the lower pitch tones, which are on this side of the graph, it's generally the vowel sounds. On this side, in the higher pitch tones, it's more of the consonant sounds like sh, and s, exactly. So when you have a higher frequency hearing loss, or which can be caused by noise, you lose some of the clarity of speech. So with the clarity, that means often people say things like, I know somebody's talking, but I just can't quite catch what they're saying. There are now hearing...
all the time.
Sorry?
Genuinely, even with your voice now, there's so much that I'm missing.
Your hearing loss may not be exactly the same as this though, so you may,
Exactly right.
it may be you're missing some of the volume as well. But
all hearing losses are different.
exactly, they all are. All the graphs are different. So there are hearing aids now that effectively manage this type of hearing loss. I'm not going to go into it too much because Bruce, at 1 o'clock, Bruce will be going through all of covering hearing aids. So, a high frequency hearing loss, how does that impact your hearing? It can affect your ability to hear soft and medium high pitched tones, so birds, mobile ringing, the doorbell, the telephone. It can also mean you miss the beginning or the end of a word, or the end of a sentence. And conversations in a group or in a busy environment can be more difficult. So, for example, in a cafe or a restaurant, it can also mean you find it difficult to differentiate between similar words. So, for example, differentiating between fix and six, or ship and dip. If you're missing some of those higher pitched sounds, the consonant sounds, it may mean that it's more difficult to distinguish which word's being said, and it means it makes it harder to follow the conversation. You can also mean, if you're a music lover, it can make it more difficult to distinguish the melody and pitch of different tones of the music. So how do you tell if a sound is too loud? So if a noise is as loud as, or louder than very heavy traffic, if you're talking to somebody a metre away and you have to raise your voice, it's too loud. If things, after you leave the noisy place, if things sound different, like they sound muffled, or you hear any ringing or noises in your ears, that means the noise was too loud. So can noise-induced hearing loss be detected early? So as I was saying, with temporary hearing loss, there are signs, such as tinnitus, which is ringing or buzzing or any noises in your ears. The other thing is your hearing can feel muffled. So if you go somewhere very loud, like a very loud concert, or someone's been mowing the lawn for a while, they may, for the next day or two, feel like their hearing's a bit muffled and get a bit ringing, and then it improves again. This normally goes undetected though until people are having significant trouble in day-to-day life, especially in noisy environments. That tends to be the first place people notice they're having some difficulty. So does noise-induced hearing loss cause any pain? Generally no. On a day-to-day, general noise exposure isn't generally painful. Noise exposure can be painful if it's something very loud, like a bomb going off, and in that scenario it will be painful. If it's not painful, it doesn't mean though it's not causing any damage. So a lawnmower or going to watch the Formula 1, for example, that can still damage your hearing. So the impact of hearing loss. There was a report done in 2006 by Access Economics called Listen Here. And that report showed that $11.75 billion of every year is the cost to Australia for hearing loss. Hearing loss costs Australia $11.75 billion per year. 1 in 6 Australians are affected by hearing loss, and that's expected to increase to 1 in 4 by 2050. And 36% of hearing loss is attributable to excess noise exposure. So that means that just over a third of hearing loss is preventable at the moment. So how do you protect your hearing? So you avoid loud sounds and music. You wear earplugs if you are going to go somewhere noisy, whether it's a concert or go and watch a car race or anything like that, or earmuffs if you're going to mow the lawn or do any DIY carpentry and things like that. Cotton wool and paper tissue won't protect your hearing. No, won't have any impact whatsoever. It'll be very minimal, and in terms of the scale we're talking about, if it's going to impact your hearing, it won't help. And if you're going to use earplugs, it's important to know how to fit them correctly, because if they're inserted incorrectly, they may offer little or no protection.
So using earplugs?
Yes.
You're not wax, is it going to push it further down?
Potentially, but with wax, so do hearing aids though. So the earplugs shouldn't be going so far down your ear canal that the wax is pushed and doing any damage. And also, the wax you need to manage anyway to make it for hearing aids if you're wearing hearing aids as well. But the earplugs shouldn't have any impact. And you're not normally wearing earplugs on a day-to-day basis for them to cause any accumulation of wax.
If you work in an environment every day, you've got earplugs.
You normally wear, in a day-to-day, if you're on a construction site or working on a jackhammer, you normally wear earmuffs for noise rather than earplugs. So the question is, all earplugs he's ever seen are round and your ear canal is almost rectangular, so why is that? The foam earplugs, which you can see pictured here, they are round, but generally they squash, to put them in correctly, you squash them right down, and once you put them in, they expand out to fill the gaps. Everyone's ear canal shape is very different, so in that sense, it's just a general shape that they've chosen to make it easy to get them in and out. With something like your musician's earplugs, which are pictured here, they are custom fitted to your ears. So to make musician's earplugs, we take an impression of your ears like we do to make hearing aid moulds. And there's 3 levels of attenuations, from attenuating about 9 to 10 dB, then there's a 15 dB level, and there's also a 25 dB level. And what they do is they reduce the level of sound relatively evenly across all the frequencies, so that if you're a musician, it means you can monitor your voice and the music more accurately than with the foam ones or with noise earplugs. You can also get custom-made noise earplugs, which are same thing, we take an impression and we send away, and they look more like this. And so they have the musician's earplugs have a hole that runs the whole way through and an attenuator on the end. The musician's earplugs basically are custom designed for your ear, and they block off your ear canal to reduce the sound as much as possible. Yes?
How much do they cost?
It varies. You'd have to check with reception. I'm not sure exactly how much the noise ones are. It depends on what brand and things like that. The other thing you can use is earmuffs, and there's legislation in place for workplaces to try and reduce the noise as much as possible, so that things like this are the last resort rather than the first resort. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the people who fly that might suffer from vestibular disorders can actually get airplane earplugs.
Yes.
So when you take off and land, it helps with the ear pressure.
So that was just discussing airplane earplugs, and they have little valves in them that try and reduce the pressure change when you're flying, so that during takeoff and landing, the pressure change is more gradual rather than sudden. So if you find flying uncomfortable, they can make the plane trip a bit more comfortable during takeoff and landing. Yes?
Don't we also hear through the mastoid bone?
The question is, don't we also hear through the mastoid bone? Yes, we do, which is why there's also legislation in place to try and reduce the sound, and these earplugs and other forms of ear protection should be the last resort rather than the first resort.
So really they don't take any noise away from the astrophone, do they? So the earmuffs really the best thing to wear?
No. Earmuffs will, so the question is they don't take any sound away from the mastoid. Bone conduction, which is what Dr. Beese was talking about with the Baha or the bone-anchored hearing aid, they can't, earplugs or the earmuffs won't impact the sound going through that source, going through that pathway. So earmuffs versus earplugs won't have any impact. It's more important in that scenario, if it's very loud and you can feel the vibrations, to move away from the sound source. Yes?
Australians have been very successful in advertising the social cost of smoking
Yes.
and legislate against that. Is there any organisation that is trying to advertise the social cost of noise, particularly recreation noise, of loud music and so on, gymnasium and so on?
So the question was, is there any organisation who is trying to advertise the social cost and impact of noise? The answer is yes, there are several. So, for example, this week is Hearing Awareness Week, which is why we're here today, and that's run by the Deafness Forum, which is a national organisation. It's an umbrella organisation that looks after lots of different support groups and other organisations associated with hearing loss, deafness, and audiologists and other professionals associated with hearing loss, and they are trying to increase awareness. There's also the National Acoustic Laboratories, which are based in Chatswood. They do a lot of research into noise and the impact of noise. There's a gentleman there by the name of Warwick Williams who does a lot of research into noise, and one of his major areas of study at the moment is looking at recreational noise, the levels, and the impact it's having on hearing. There's a lot of information out there.
Have you got anything out here that we can access that websites or any other information printed that we can access?
There's nothing printed at the moment. The question was, is there anything printed regarding noise?
Just so we can access it?
Yes, we can put something up on the website. I think I'll ask Vanessa about that afterwards. Okay, so in summary, the impact on hearing by noise is determined by how long you're listening to the sound, how loud the sound is, and how often you're listening to the sound. So all of those things factor in to how much impact noise will have on your hearing. The moral of the story is to, if possible, avoid loud sounds, and if you can't, use hearing protection.